Good morning. I'm Jose Ursua, analyst and investment committee member at Dodge & Cox, which is pleased to sponsor this year's Economic Summit. My colleagues and I are really thrilled to be here. It's a terrific program, and this panel promises to be a big part of that. Dodge & Cox is an investment management company founded in 1930 on guiding principles that we hold dear to this day, including integrity, collaboration, client alignment, and continuous improvement. We offer actively managed, low-cost, no-load mutual funds spanning equities and fixed income. We are value, high-conviction, long-term oriented. While we serve clients from various parts of the world, our hearts remain in San Francisco, for those who know the Tony Bennett song, and if you don't, you really don't want me to sing it. Today, it's my pleasure to introduce our next panel, Leading Through Change, University Presidents on the Future of Higher Education, which will be moderated by John Hennessy, former Stanford University President and current Chairman of the Board of Directors of Alphabet. I'll let John introduce our distinguished panelists, but I'll just leave you with a thought John wrote nearly 14 years ago, describing technology as a tsunami hitting higher education. The key word here is tsunami. John, I wonder what word, what geological type of event you would use to discuss and describe what's going on today. In the menu, I found some online. You can choose from earthquake, continental drift, asteroid impact, and ice age, among many others. I'll leave you with that, and I really look forward to the discussion in this panel. Thank you, everybody.
Well, given the rate of change, it has to be either earthquake or meteor. The ice age took a lot longer, so we know. I'm delighted to briefly introduce our panelists. Rich Lyons is the Chancellor of the University of California at Berkeley and the first undergraduate to serve as the university's Chancellor. Prior to assuming the Chancellor's role, he was the Dean of Berkeley's Haas School of Business and led the university efforts to expand innovation and entrepreneurship. Provost Jenny Martinez is our provost here at Stanford, the chief university budget and academic officer. Prior to assuming the role of provost, she came to Stanford in 2003 in the law school and served as dean of the law school. Christina Paxson is Brown's University president and professor of economics and public policy. She's been at Brown since 2012. And she has focused on building Brown's standing as a strong research university and also on economic partnerships through the community and government. Prior to being at Brown, she served as the dean of the Princeton School of International and Public Affairs. And Karl Scholz is the president of the University of Oregon. Prior to that, he spent 35 years at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. The weather has improved in Oregon over Madison for sure, where he was an economics professor, provost, and interim chancellor. He is a proud Stanford alum, having received his PhD studying under John Chauvin. So thank you, panel members. Well, the last few years in higher education have been extraordinary. We thought the pandemic would really kill us, destroy the way we work with students. And then along came the Gaza protests, further inflaming campus and making things even more difficult. And then came cataclysmic change. And change that's dramatically affected universities. A threat to our long-term relationship between the federal government as a funder of research and universities as the places where that research is carried out. Attempts to intrude on academic freedom and dictate what we can teach, who we can hire, who we can admit. It's been a fascinating time and a hard time to really lead universities in this difficult time. So I'm delighted that we have such distinguished panelists to join us. The format we're going to do today is each panel member is going to make a 5-minute opening statement, and then we'll discuss among ourselves some of the key issues and questions, and we've posed those to the panelists, and then we'll open the floor for questions from the floor. So Rich, why don't we start with you?
Okay, well, thank you very much. Appreciate the invitation. So there are 3 quick topics I'll touch on in the 5 minutes that I have here. One is, do we have some getting better to do? And of course we do, and I'll talk a little bit about how we're thinking about that. The second is, how is the underlying model changing, and how does that connect to our mission? I think that's really fundamental. And then the last thing I want to touch on is this question of trust and confidence more widely. And I'm sure we'll all be talking about each of these topics in one way or another. So first of all, are we listening? Are we listening to the world? Are we listening to the world? Are we listening to the economy? Are we listening to the current equilibrium politically in this country? There's no question that we are. And we have some getting better to do. Let me just offer, I'm kind of a nut for culture and how leaders shape culture. One of the things that we're working on at Berkeley is, how do we evolve faster? Now, any organization would ask themselves that, and you'd ask that of yourself at any given time, but it's especially important for us right now. One of the things that I'm talking a lot about, maybe too much, people would say, can you talk about something else? But I do talk about this fairly often. We are going to shift Berkeley's culture, Berkeley's operating culture, from no because, we're natural born skeptics, critical thinkers, we're really good at no because, to yes if. I want to hear your if conditions. Put your if conditions on the table. We'd better be clear-eyed about what they look like, and then we're going to bring our creativity to eliminate or mitigate them. But the default is yes, it's not no. And for really large organizations that have been around a long time, we need to, the clock speed on our change rate needs to go way up. So that's sort of point one, and that's just one little way of going about it. That's not all we're doing to increase the pace of evolution at Berkeley, but it's one piece of it. Okay, let me talk a little bit very quickly about the model and how that's shifting. How does any of our universities, these are great research universities, right? How does any of our universities, how do we participate more in the economic and societal value that we create? That's actually an important question. If we're thinking about secular decline in the public sector's willingness to fund research, and I think that's kind of inevitable, that's not just a single administration thing, we do need to fund these remarkable research enterprises in a new way. And so we're thinking a lot about that. And new companies that get created by any of our campuses, that's part of it. But increasingly, we're leaning into participating in the equity of those companies through licensing acquired equity, but many, many other mechanisms. I won't go into detail here, but we really do need to participate more in ways that are consistent with our values, in the economic and societal value that we're creating. So we can talk more about that later, but I think that's actually quite a fundamental element of what we're doing here. These universities are among society's most valuable assets. There may be people in the room that disagree with that proposition. I couldn't agree with it more. And there is a single source of prosperity in our societies and in our economies. A single source. New ideas put into practice. And we are engines for fundamental new ideas. Not all ideas, but the most fundamental ones come from institutions like represented up here. And we're a lot better at helping to put new ideas into practice than we were 10 or 20 years ago. So I just want to flag that. Okay, so as I think about some of the last topic here, some of the kind of culture changes and other elements that we're thinking about. Look, we have some getting better to do. I'll conclude on this idea. I'll just one example. Any of us could describe any examples. We have a new course on campus. We launched it over the summer. It is last summer. Over 5,000 people have signed up and have taken it. It's called Openness to Opposing Views. Mm-hmm. Bang. It's like, I want to see the syllabus. I want to read it. I want to see what's going on. It's like, do we have to get better at that as a society? Yeah. Do we have to get better at that as a university? We do need more viewpoint diversity on these campuses. I agree with that. And courses and curriculum, that's just one example. It's not like the be-all and the end-all. But I promise you, we're listening.
Thank you, Rich. Jenny, you want to take it next?
Yeah, absolutely. And let me join John in welcoming everyone to Stanford. So as you shared at the beginning, it's a very important time for universities because it is such a time of change, both in the national landscape and the perception of universities, the global landscape, and also the technological changes, most notably AI, that are disrupting so many things in our society. And so On the one hand, I think it's a time for universities to go back to first principles of what are we good at? What is our distinctive role in society? Which is that we're places of discovery and places of learning. And those are critical functions for society, and they happen in universities. And also, especially for a place like Stanford, we are a place of innovation. And that innovation in how we approach both learning and discovery as part of our missions is more important than ever at this moment. And so when we look at the landscape now, thinking about innovation in learning, how are we creating that environment that, as you talked about, is one of openness, of curiosity, where people are exploring different viewpoints, being open to different ideas, because that's where the discovery and learning come from. If you don't have that environment of genuine openness and curiosity, then you're not going to have the basic mission of the university carried out. And so here at Stanford, similarly, we're doing a lot of things to look at how we cultivate in our students that intellectual openness to new ideas. We have a program for all of our first-year students called College, Civic, Liberal, and Global Education that we launched a couple of years ago in a pilot and are in the process of now expanding to all of our students, where in the first year, in small discussion-based seminars, they look at things in the winter quarter on civics, for example, and they read John Stuart Mill on why it's important to hear from people you disagree with. Mill writes, "He who knows only his own side of the case knows little of that." And so our students engage with, why is it important to understand the other side of an argument? How does that help you find truth? And looking at how we do that. Also in the realm of learning, thinking about some of the skepticism about who is served by universities and how many people we serve and how can we reach more students. I think the University of California system, or other great public universities, all the way up from community colleges through research universities, need to think creatively about how we reach more students. And for a place like Stanford, that includes potentially expanding our undergraduate class. We would love to see our undergraduates expand and to see other elite universities try to educate more students. And also thinking about how we reach more students, not just in our traditional degree programs, but at other points in their lives, because the world is changing so rapidly that people are going to need those different skills at different points in their careers. So how do we adapt the way we deliver education to do that? In the realm of discovery, of the kind of research that goes on campus and the vital role that plays in the economy and driving the innovation economy. Right here in Silicon Valley, probably the most innovative entrepreneurial place in the world, thinking about the role of universities in that ecosystem, the particular kind of research that happens only in a university, because the profit that comes from it is not immediately apparent, but in the long run, drives the economy, drives innovation, drives the increase in sort of the betterment of humanity. And so in an environment where we're seeing reduced government funding likely in the future and more competition with the private industry in different ways, what are the ways of collaboration, of coming up with new models for funding research that continue to drive that engine of discovery forward? And then in the realm of innovation, how do we get those ideas out into the world? And as you talked about, I think that both the University of California and Stanford and all of our universities have really in the past decades looked for how we get those ideas out into the world faster. How do we partner with the private sector or with government so that the discoveries that are coming out of our labs, out of our researchers get out into the world? And also how we bring the expertise that we have on our campuses to understand the world around us for our humanities and social science faculty, to help us grapple with what do these new technologies like AI mean for society? What can we learn from the history of the Industrial Revolution? What can we learn about how our society can grapple with these technologies and better understand our world? Universities are a really important place for that to happen in society. And so how do we create the environment and atmosphere where that's happening in a way that is innovative, that is open, and that helps move us forward?
Great. Thank you, Jenny. Christina, you want to try next?
I will. Thank you very much. It's great to be here with all of you. I thought I'd take up the question of declining public trust in higher education. And it's an important issue. And I think because trust has declined, it's been harder to deal with some of the more recent attacks on higher ed. And this is my lifelong work, is moving things forward in higher education. So I am a staunch defender of the research and the education that we do. And I do think that societies ignore what we do at their peril in terms of individual well-being, but also economic growth, innovation, prosperity, things like that. So when I look at declines in public trust, I look at I'm a data-focused economist, so you're going to get this in what I say. But I put things into two very separate buckets. And one is the feeling that university education is increasingly out of reach. It's too expensive. Debt is too high. It's out of control. And the value proposition isn't there. Okay, let's look at the data, because I think the data tell a very different story. If you look over the last 10 years, the last decade, and there's actually a very new paper by Phil Levine and Brookings on this, the cost of net cost of four-year public and private education in real terms has either stayed flat or declined, 10 years. So what you see is a set of institutions that are working really, really hard to maintain access. I know in Brown, our net cost has stayed flat on average for a decade. And we've moved, as a number of our peers have done, to becoming no loan. So when you get financial aid at Brown, no loans in your packages. So we are not the ones defaulting on debt. Our students are not the ones. That doesn't mean everything's working perfectly. And we have to keep pushing on access and affordability. I would say where the problems are when it comes to debt, again, look at the data. It tends to be not very high quality universities, mainly for-profits, where students are defaulting, or students who start education and don't complete. So really focusing on making sure that students come in the door, get out the door, that's something we need to deal with. Second issue. The second issue is this belief that we have slid from educating to indoctrinating. And if true, that's a really serious concern. And I think all of us have programs that we've started to improve dialogue on campus and bring in competing points of view. Again, though, look at the facts. So there's a recent Lumina Gallup poll. 2% of college students overall feel like they're not welcome on campus because of their political views. 3% of Republican students. Okay. At Brown, we recently did a survey. 90% of our students say that they feel like they can fulfill their course requirements without suppressing their identities or viewpoints. I would like that number to be 100%. And so some of the work we're doing is aims to push that up. We'll repeat the survey and see whether we're successful. But that's really important. Two concerns I have, and then maybe one option for, I think I need to talk faster. One thing we can do to make change. One is there's some evidence that students are increasingly self-selecting to universities and colleges with student bodies that share their political views. They are self-sorting. That's a problem. And so when we look at admissions policies, I think we really have to push against that. That's a problem. The second is, and I have to confess, is there some indoctrination in classrooms? I look at a few classes and I hear what faculty are doing, like don't encourage students to go to protest because you agree with the policy. That's not a good idea. So there are some examples where I think we have some work to do. My own view is that you want to approach this as a, professional development. What does good pedagogy look like? Good pedagogy, and most faculty want to be good teachers. You want to say, what can you do to promote open discourse in your classrooms? Instead of going to them saying, you're indoctrinating, and then we get you're suppressing my free speech. You don't want to go there. The last point I would make is I've thrown out a lot of facts. Trust doesn't get built through facts. Sorry. It gets built, it's feelings-based. And I think one of the best things we can do is show our local communities that we love them and we care about them, in addition to getting the facts out. So we're doing a lot of things at Brown, like workforce development, We're doing things like offering free summer programs to our local Providence students. You want your local communities to say, I love my local university. And that's one way to start to turn the trust thing around. So I'll stop there.
That's great. Thank you. Karl.
Lo and behold, I also want to talk about trust. And I want to talk about this phenomenon that fewer than half of Americans think that universities are playing a positive, constructive role in society. And so that's an existential challenge. Now, when university presidents or leaders get together, we kind of start talking about, well, if only they knew about this, and only if we knew about that. But I actually don't think that's quite the right framing, because trust in all institutions in the United States is plummeting. And we're doing a heck of a lot better than Congress. So that's a bumper sticker. All right? And people who...
It's a low bar, Karl.
But people who know us like us. So if you survey our students and our parents, they're saying, yeah, we're having a pretty good experience. Now, they don't always like administrators, but they're having a pretty good experience. And so I think part of our problem is 62% of Americans over the age 25 don't have college degrees. And we spend too much time talking among ourselves and not to others. And so, just one example, academic freedom. All right, I'm a university president. I believe deeply, deeply, foundational principle of universities, that individual scholars can pursue truth wherever they find it and not worry about consequences. My mill worker friends in Oregon think I've lost my mind. Academic freedom, the moment I speak up, I'm going to lose my job. That's talking amongst ourselves. And so there's an issue, like there's the Edelman Trust Barometer. There's a lot of data. Christine mentioned some of it. But it's 2/3 of Americans don't trust other people. And that's an existential challenge for society. Imagine grappling with technology and AI and you don't trust. Like, why do I adopt this? I don't trust it. I'm going to lose my job. Or address the problems of climate change. Or universities. Why invest in universities if you don't trust what we're doing? And so I think the fix to this, I don't really know, but I think the fix to this, it's not a PR campaign. It is to do more to focus on outcomes and get as much as we can outside our bubbles. And so my favorite word for this is proximity. I would love for Jenny and Christine and Rich to spend time in all 50 states, in every county in the states, because they are phenomenally accomplished people, but they're also great listeners, they're funny, and get to know people and also listen. And so thinking about the outcomes that matter beyond the academy, to better serve our students and families, we're relentlessly thinking about this. But think about our workforce needs of our states in our regions. Engage with our communities. And then think about these things that Christine talked about, affordability, return on investment, and then to talk about values. We are not crazy woke Trotskyites. We believe in the same things that make America great. Well, Rich, maybe. The rest of us are not crazy. No. But again, the values that we have are the values of America. And so to close then, I have to read this because I actually like these words. Legitimacy is built at the edges, not the center. Stop asking, how do we get people to trust us? And instead frame it, how would a skeptic need to see? What would a skeptic need to see? How would they have to feel? And what would they have to experience to believe in us? And I think that is the profound work all of us are trying to do. And I think that, I'll be blunt, is what's needed to try to save higher education.
Great. Thank you, Karl. Thank you, panel members. That was a great start. So when I became president of the university, the longest serving board member on our board of trustees came to me and said, our job as the board working with the president is to protect the 4 W's. Who gets in, what they study, what research we do, and who we hire on the faculty. It seems that All of those are under some attack now, some from the federal government, some from states, not necessarily the states represented here, but certain states in the union. How do we preserve those things while addressing the fact that Rich mentioned? We have to listen, and we have to be intelligent about our response. I think simply saying academic freedom is probably not sufficient, unfortunately. Any thoughts about this?
I mean, I could start with a little bit on who gets in. And, first, the laws change. We follow the law. So that's really important. But, I do think the funnel into higher education it could be expanded. And we can do this by proactively reaching out to, veterans, to rural students. We do a lot of recruiting now in religious day schools. Because we want a diverse student. And this gets to the point of students self-selecting to be we want students who are different, this is diversity, right? I don't think diversity is a dirty word. I think it's a good word, and we want it. So we're focusing a lot on that. I will say, maybe at risk of, having military fellows at our institutions is actually really important. And so the recent decision to defund some of those programs has been, I think, deeply disappointing to us, because that's part of the fabric of what makes Brown a diverse, intellectually vibrant community.
Agreed.
Yeah, well, I think that we've all thought, it's a great question. We've all thought quite a bit about it. I mean, I think even the word academic freedom, I think you say that to most people and they think you can teach anything you want in your class. There's no accountability. It's like, I don't even use the phrase anymore outside of the academy. I talk about the freedom to discover, ask the questions we need to ask, the freedom to teach, and the freedom to learn, which effectively leans into your 4 Ws. I think part of it is on the faculty side. Well, I'm an economist. It's like, what are the equilibrium implications? And let's be as honest as we can be about it. Of some states saying you can't teach that question is unacceptable. Now I'm sure there's every different view in this room, but there's going to be some sorting. There's going to be some shifting. Talent is going to move around. It's hard to know exactly how it's going to move around, but also internationally, not just nationally. And so those are some of the things that I think about. And for my faculty, it's like they need to hear that I get how important this is, that they get to ask the questions they need to ask. Now, there are macro factors that will change the amount of funding for this, that, and the other thing. And then the question is, how much can we, if we feel it's really important that freedom be pursued, how do we backfill some of the things that are really important? But anyways, those are some quick thoughts on that. We're going to see some sorting in this country.
I'll pick up on just that theme of, do we call it academic freedom? I like to think about freedom of thought and freedom of speech. And both of those are really fundamental American values. They're the basis on which the US Constitution was written. And they've been a huge source of strength for the United States as we've developed as a society and player in the world. And they're absolutely fundamental to universities and to our mission of discovery and learning. If you don't have freedom of thought, that is to consider ideas that might seem unorthodox, that might seem controversial, you're not going to get to the discoveries that are so foundational to the progress of science, of technology, of the economy and society. And if you don't have freedom of speech, if people aren't sharing their views and learning to engage with those they disagree with, we can't have the kind of functioning democracy that America has benefited from over the last centuries, and we won't have the educated workforce that's necessary to drive innovation and economic growth forward. And so when I think about why is academic freedom important, it really is that freedom of thought and freedom of speech that we need to cultivate in our students to have discovery and learning. And that's something society is struggling with. It's not just a left-right issue. You hear, of course, there's a lot of attention right now to state laws that try to restrict what people teach in classrooms. We've heard a lot, and I certainly have seen in my experience over the last decade in higher education, self-censorship, where people don't feel comfortable sharing their views because of the fear of how their peers might react. And I think social media and other phenomena like that have only exacerbated that trend. So how do we create the environment where people really are able to exercise both the freedom of thought and freedom of speech? And I think it's really just critical to our success in both the research and the education missions.
I have a set of really smart colleagues, and so I think our job as academic leaders is to try to eliminate the frictions that keep people from doing their very, very, very best work, and then reach out in a way that helps students, prospective students, imagine what it is that they can be. And I love what Rich is talking about and doing at Berkeley, that yes, if, because we can frequently joke about academic time, how long it takes to make change on our campuses. And so I tip my hat to that. And then to be part of our communities, the spin-outs, the startups, and try to support the entrepreneurial activity that our students are just thirsting for, and then helping people understand that that's happening, and that's going to bring more goodwill and that positive flywheel, if you will.
John, thanks for that. And I just want to jump in with a super quick story, because it's very recent. So this is a recency effect. But I was talking to some students who had gone through a Pathways program. So they were, anyways, I won't go through the details. But one of them got to do some work in a field station, some scientific work in a field station. So this is a sophomore. And what he said to me is, I realized after that experience, I needed to be this. He didn't say I need to be this. It's like that experience revealed something in me that I hadn't seen before. You know that phrase, you can't be what you can't see? Mm-hmm. It's like, boom. I think that's when we're at our best as universities. And so those stories, that's not just a head story. That's right here. Mm-hmm. You hear something like that, it's like, oh. Now, that doesn't happen with every student, but those are the moments where you realize this is important work. Yeah.
Yeah. You know, one of the unique things about the U.S. system is we have great public and great private institutions, and they compete against one another. And not just on the football field, but also for the best faculty and the best students. And now there's a tax on the economic structure, whether it's endowment tax for the privates or the underfunding by state governments of the public institutions. How are we going to turn that around? Because otherwise I'm worried we will not be able to hold net costs flat anymore, and it will creep up again as it did 20 or 30 years ago. Any thoughts?
Well, let me start as one of the two public universities here, but doesn't happen to be in the great state of California. The state of Oregon funds public four-year higher education. We're number 46 in the country. And so I came from a solidly purple state of Wisconsin, and the stars aligned, and I got this opportunity at Oregon. I said, oh my gosh, I'm going to this solid blue state. They're going to love public higher education. I'm out of this purple thing. And then after I said yes, I looked at the data.
John, I think Rhode Island is below you.
All right.
Rhode Island, maybe.
I was going to say, note to self, Christina, look at the data before. And I had what I call this Scooby-Doo moment, like, uh-oh, 46. And it comes from a state, Oregon is a natural resource-based state. Timber for decades and decades was the economic driver of the state. And so a strong back and a good work ethic. And then the four-year colleges were viewed as elite, where elite is not a positive word in the state. And so it is, again, trying to make the case that we are vital for Oregon's prosperity. Intel is located, or large parts of Intel located in the state of Oregon. We have the Silicon Forest. We have a burgeoning biotech industry, and people are just, oh, University of Oregon has something to do with that? And so those challenges of funding are on our minds constantly.
I'm a big fan of public education, and what I see, at least in our state, but I think it's true in a lot of other states, is there are real demands on state budgets right now. And, we're having a primary health care crisis in our state. Medical costs are going through the roof. And so the state legislators are saying, like, do I invest more in higher ed, or do I do I address these really immediate needs? So I don't think we're going to solve this unless we look at the bigger fiscal picture for states, and that's really complicated right now. The tax, the endowment taxes, the kind of more specific taxes that are affecting privates, again, I think it's this anti-elitism. We've seen it before in the US, but it's never really been, we've never seen it become exercised in this sort of financial attack. So this is going to be something we deal with going forward. I don't know have a good solution to that, but.
One great thing is the way that universities and the rest of higher education can partner together. And so we had a community service awards event at Stanford earlier this week, and one of the students who got an award had developed a program with one of the local community colleges, bringing community college students to do research in developmental biology here at Stanford's campus. And there were dozens of students in this program, and almost all of them then went on to four-year colleges. And that partnership and collaboration is the kind of thing that I think we can work on together in each of our regions, where research universities, like the ones represented on this stage, working in partnership with the other pieces that help scaffold more people to get to advanced education, to get them to where they need to be at a lower cost. And I think that's one of the great things the University of California public system does, where the community colleges at very low cost get a lot of kids into the pipeline, and they transfer to the four-year colleges of the Cal States or the UC system, and thinking about just the way we can all work together to get more kids the education that they deserve.
Yeah, thanks for that. I think, it's still true across the UC system, Berkeley included, that a third of our undergraduates incoming are transfers from community colleges in California. That's not true at the University of Michigan or Virginia, right? This state is really quite distinctive that way. And it's an important part of the economic mobility engine that these universities are. I just want to flag one quick element, and the public v. private thing, right? So you can talk about land grant and moral act and these kinds of things. There are lots of important historical elements to that story. But if you look, for example, so Berkeley, if you go back 10 years ago, I should know the exact date, but we get more funding every year from the federal government than the state government. Mm-hmm. So we can talk about, state funds 12, 13% of our budget. But that flip is a surprise to most people. And in part because you have such a wonderful hospital and medical school. If you add up federal plus state funding and at Stanford and federal and state funding at Berkeley, Stanford gets more public funding than Berkeley does. So now, funding is not.
You should throw UCSF in with Berkeley, and that'll even it out. It's all medical schools.
So I think part of it is what does publicness mean in this era, right? We used that phrase 2 generations ago, and we still use it, and I think that bears some reflection. And part of it, of course, is the scale. It's the transfer students. It's some of these, what scale do you educate at and things like that. But even the public v. private taxonomy deserves greater reflection, I think. It's really quite interesting.
Well, I think this point that Berkeley has done a superb job in the whole UC system with transfers. Because if you look at it, it actually reduces the net cost of education because it's much less expensive to be at a community college. And when you graduate from Berkeley, it doesn't matter that you spent 2 years at Foothill before you went to Berkeley. Everybody knows you're a Berkeley graduate. And I think it's a model I think we could do more of in the US as a way to leverage and provide it more effective. So let's talk about the other things that are happening at this same time. Certainly, we've all seen the rise of China as the first real across-the-board competitor for higher education. The quality of their students, the quality of their faculty, the rate at which their research funding is growing much faster than the U.S. The rate of patents have surpassed the U.S. now. How do we think about a response from the U.S. university system given the uncertainty of the federal government as a partner in this time? That's too depressing a question, maybe. That's a good
John, can we talk football?
I'm not going to talk about the train wreck of college athletics.
Well, maybe I'll start. This is a big and very important question. I think of it as really a global question. I mean, we can think about China, and I think it comes in sharpest relief relative to China. But it's really a quite global phenomenon. I mean, I think we are seeing offers and advertising that we would provide an offer from lots of different countries around the world, saying, if we've got research funding, if yours is drying up, and you should think about this country if you haven't thought about us before. We haven't seen at the top universities a big exodus yet, but our faculty are getting offers that they weren't getting before, and they're really some of them are quite extraordinary. Of course, it's right at the top of the quality level as well. So I think about it that way. Look, ultimately, reasonable people can disagree, and reasonable people are disagreeing in this country right now. But if you thought about, for example, where does the U.S.'s national security come from? And they're experts in this room, far beyond me. But if you said, well, it's been, in its most essential element, it's been technological. It's not boots on the ground. And where does that technological hegemony come from? It comes from our universities. So to go to something as acute as national security, and then walk upstream and think about the universities and their role. So that's sort of, it's not just about national security, your question's wider than that. But ultimately, it's sort of like, if we're pulling back public investment in the research that's going on at our universities, it's hard to find a STEM field that does not have dual use potential in it. So, obviously we're invested in the research enterprise, but I think when you start digging deeper into it, you start realizing this is maybe the best way that we are being pro-America.
I
Jenny.
think one of the things that's important to realize is just looking over the last 70 years from the period after World War II, when this partnership between the federal government, research universities, and the private sector in the U.S. developed, which has made the United States so prosperous over those decades and also such a leader in innovation and technology. Thinking about the value of that partnership, but also thinking about what are the aspects of the United States and the culture in our universities that really made that possible. And it is that environment of openness, of freedom of thought, of freedom of speech, and openness to people from all over the world, and the way that we have welcomed the very best, the most innovative thinkers to come and want to come because they know that they can do their best work here, and that the fundamental model of university research is of open sharing of ideas, that it's not ideas that will be kept, that will be locked up and kept secret for the government or in a proprietary way for a company, but universities are in the business of sharing ideas openly. And that culture of openness, I think, is really important to preserve and is still an advantage of U.S. universities when you compare, for example, to the rising universities in China. They don't have the same values of openness that have been so foundational, and I think it's really important to keep that in mind as we look at how to reinforce the strength of America's research enterprise.
So let's talk about AI, because it's really coming at an incredible rate, both in terms of research. It's interesting that this connection to research universities is quite critical. The term artificial intelligence was coined by John McCarthy at a meeting at Dartmouth some 60, 70 years ago. And the big breakthroughs that occurred, the AlexNet paper, a work based on work at Toronto and at Princeton, for example, and follow-on papers that occurred, reinforcement learning, the current technique that's being heavily used, came out of University of Massachusetts. So there's a lot of academic roots in this. How are we going to ensure, one, that we can continue to invest in these new technologies, which are critical? AI is critical both to economic and to national security, both. And secondly, how are we going to deal with the rise of new technologies which are changing the way they do learning? I don't know if you saw, there's a recent application somebody wrote called Einstein. So Einstein goes directly to the Canvas suite. You just give it your course number. It pulls the assignment out. It goes and gets the answer and submits the homework for you completely automatically, agentically. So we can talk about a lot, both the research side of the coin, but also what's going to happen to education as we go forward. Who wants to start? Plenty of space here.
That's all the time we have. Thank you very much for coming.
Yeah, you know, I'll give a comment on how at least my faculty, because we're talking about this a lot at Brown, and we're talking about AI in terms of research applications, what we're doing in research, teaching and learning, and also business operations. How is it going to change? Can we reduce costs? Can we do our work better? I think all three are really important. The faculty who are most threatened by this are our humanists. They're like, you know, put up, close the barn door, bolted, like, let's not have anything to do with this. And ironically, and I'd love to hear what other people think, and this came up in the last panel, we need to think really hard about what students need to learn to be successful in the job market in 10, 20, 30 years. And none of us really know. We don't know the answer to that. So I pull it back to fundamentals, and I think it's communication, it's critical thought, it's, you know, the fundamentals of a liberal education are probably more important than learning how to code in Java right now, right? So maybe in a way this will tilt us back towards some of those core liberal values that I know all of our universities are really invested in. But it's going to be fascinating to see how this plays out. I don't know the answers, but we have to keep watching it.
The question that's come up is, do we need to teach writing anymore?
Yes, we do.
Well, we need to teach critical thought development, but do we need to teach the actual practice of crafting a sentence anymore?
Yes.
I'm asking the question. I'm not arguing one way or the other.
But so I couldn't agree with Christine more with what she just said. And then the other salutary effect of AI is it is really, really forcing us to think harder about pedagogy. The sort of the getting up and then testing students on how much of the lecture they retained and all, it just doesn't work. And students will immediately resort to AI if you haven't given them compelling reasons about why they shouldn't. And so that's forcing our instructors to really grapple with what it is that they're trying to teach. And they do need to learn to write before then using AI, because that's how you're going to critique, right? A great liberal education should be the cheat code for AI. And so that when students go out onto the market, they can say, my skills are augmented with this, and I am going to be even more productive because my wise use of this extraordinary new technology, I think.
I think we're going to see a lot of experimentation. So what we see in our classrooms is it's almost a barbell as it evolves, where there's one set of things where faculty are trying to work with students with no access to technology. So maybe that is learning to write or learning the basics of how to code or in some of the science classes with no access to AI. And then at the other end of things, really, how do you use AI to superpower what you're doing, to analyze data faster, to write better, to sort of cover more territory? Where I think in the middle, I think is where our classrooms are running into a lot of trouble, where if you tell people, well, you could use AI a little bit on this assignment, that's just not going to work, right? Students are going to use it because they're smart and they want to sort of get their assignments done. And so thinking creatively about what are the things we need to teach students to do on their own, and then how do we scaffold that to using technology. And I agree that the humanities are going to be more important than ever. We just heard from one of our alums at McKinsey that they're hiring a lot more humanities grads at McKinsey because AI can help you with the Excel spreadsheet, but some of the critical thinking skills, some of the broader perspectives, those are the kinds of things. And so, you want someone who is a good thinker, and that's going to involve the kind of classical liberal arts education where you've studied a lot of different things as an undergrad to get that broad perspective.
One thing, just to draw on something that came up in the last panel, on the research side, the need for computing power is, we look at projections, and it's just, when you actually ask, like, what do we need? The answer is infinite, right? And which it can't really be, I know. But we have to solve that problem.
Yeah, I mean, we're off by such a large amount. The
Yeah.
average person working at Anthropic or OpenAI, the average engineer, probably has as much compute power as some entire laboratories or departments do in the university.
Definitely. Just a quick thought on this side on AI. Somebody said to me recently, I hadn't heard this line before, but it's consistent with what was just said, is if you want to be able to write well with AI, you need to know how to write.
Yeah.
I disagree with that. I actually agree with the premise of that comment for the reasons mentioned. Here's another thing that came up recently. If we sort of said, all right, robustness in this era of AI, as best we can tell, is going to depend on some traits, maybe developable characteristics, but some of them more trait-like, i.e. difficult to shift. And we need to select for them. So we will all be using, in 10 years, an agent to ask questions of admits. Ask me some good questions. Curiosity. I can select for curiosity so much better using an LLM than my current admissions. Coachability. It's going to be really important for resilience. It's about the pace of evolution of an individual. I can select for that much better than I do today. So we can think about the curriculum and what happens when they arrive, but there's some before they arrive stuff that's going to completely change over the next 5 to 10 years.
You know what, that brings up another issue though, which is maybe one of your other questions, which is, we're under a lot of pressure to admit students based on objective criteria,
Right.
which is often, test scores and grades. And that's not how we admit students. We're looking for creativity and resilience and all the other things you just mentioned. And if those things become more important over time, I just wonder how that shifts this test score grade thing.
Good question.
Yeah.
Great.
The world is going to change so quickly. We just saw a new application for helping people do online interviews over Zoom, where the application listens to the question of the interviewer. It's trained using your background and CV, and then in real time pops up suggested answers that you can give the interviewer. So an interview all of a sudden, which is one of the things we were relying on to deal with this issue, is going to be attacked as well. So I think it's going to be an interesting time. Why don't we open up the floor for some questions? We'd like provocative questions.
Focus more specifically on scientific and medical research and how those dollars are changing. There have obviously in the past been structures that led to more money for certain things. They built on known areas, but also things that may be very, very long term. And I'm curious, as you look forward towards new sources of funding or how decisions on funding might change and not be so much from the federal government, what sort of opportunities you see, how you see that shifting. If you're looking more at sort of participating, then you're looking at more translational research as opposed to basic research. Just in general, curious about how you see research funding changing, maybe in some opportunistic ways.
Yes. Is the relationship with the federal government permanently broken, or is it purely temporary, and how's it going to change? Rich?
Well, look, it's a really fundamental question. There's at a macro level, so I'm an economist, I'll use some jargon here. Are fundamental research and translational research substitutes or complements? That's a really important question for the president of a university, because a lot of funding sources are pulling us downstream relative to history. But I think Jennifer Doudna at Berkeley has more resource to do her fundamental research, because a lot of her past postdocs and graduate students are creating companies and doing a lot of translational research in her lab. So I actually believe in a really fundamental way that fundamental research and translational research are complements, not substitutes. And that's actually a really important thing, because as a president, if people feel like the world knows any of these universities because of the fundamental research we do, that's actually true. And if you're pulling this wonderful, magnificent institution away from fundamental research, you're doing long-term harm. So that myth of substitutes is actually one that we need to confront very directly.
Maybe we'll have substitutes for funding. I think there's certainly some thought that some of the wealth created by innovations and by the innovation economy will come back to help fund university research long term. I think there's certainly some hope that that could change.
This is a way of a recent observation, and it's just kind of inspired by John and also you, who's saying that the need to speed up the rate of change. So last week I was at a luncheon meeting that was run by a guy who used to run the African Leadership Academy in Johannesburg. And they are now doing, I think it's going to be in the United States, an AI university. And the tuition will be $2,400 a year. And there's no admissions. Anyone can join for a month. And then you're evaluated how much you used the mechanics of that university, of that AI university for the month to get a permanent admission. I was absolutely, I have to find out more about it, but I was just kind of stunned by it. And it's like your Einstein thing.
Yeah, well, Sal Khan's proposed the same thing, and his tuition is $5,000 a year. So I think there'll be a lot of movement on this. There's been some interesting experiments. One of the things that I think is really true, AI applications that take the drudgery out of people's jobs are really considered the jewels in the crown. So we hate grading. All of us that teach hate grading. So we can think about uses of the technology that way to really improve and let faculty spend more time with students rather than doing a task like grading.
I'll add, this is the greatest time in history for the autodidact. The resources available for self-education is extraordinary. Now, the 18 to 22-year-old often will have a hard time getting educated that way. And so having the campus environment, I think will prosper, will continue to thrive. But the opportunity for self-learning is almost unimaginable. Mm-hmm.
I think one of the things we learned in the pandemic, speaking of the 18 to 22-year-old range, was they don't do that well alone in their rooms with computers. Right. They don't. And so just thinking about how we use the technology and the human part of education together to sort of accelerate the rate of change and to deliver things in a new way is important. But and I think also about the sort of that we're training our students as undergraduates for very long careers where the needs of the workforce are going to change. And so are there ways that they come back to us at different points in their career to learn new things, to learn new skills, and so that the relationship is one that goes on past the 4 years that they're physically here on campus?
Yeah, I agree.
So one of the things we've seen related to this AI thing recently is there are some early indications that students in the high school level are making more use of AI technology and have not mastered some things as well as they would have in an earlier time. So they're being negatively affected in terms of things like critical thinking in particular.
Even basic math.
And basic math. So this, I heard this from several math faculty, that the students are coming in unable to do math, even though they have the course.
Exactly.
And it says they've completed this course. They've taken AP Calculus, but when it comes to actually doing it, they're struggling. So this is the danger of AI, is it can lure students into thinking they actually mastered the material when they haven't mastered it.
We see that in our introductory computer science classes. So over the last year, or the last 2 years, the visits to office hours have gone down. So they're using AI rather than going to see their human teaching assistant. The scores on their problem sets and homework have gone up. They're doing better. The scores on the exam, when they don't have the AI, have gone down. So they've actually learned less. And so I think it is that the different pieces and how we put them together that are important.
Yeah.
What will each of you be doing today to make sure that in 5 to 10 years there isn't an AI agent that can do your job better than you can?
if an AI agent can do my job better than I can, all power to the AI agent. I do think we need to look at where, and I'm joking about that, obviously. I think you need human presidents if you want to maintain trust with faculty and build great organizations. But I think we have to look really hard at how AI agents can be used to make our universities function better. And that means education, that means research, it means business operations, it means, our compliance organizations are astronomically large. Those are things that probably could be done really, really well by AI. And that would reduce our costs a lot. So I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely true. I think part of the answer is focus on EQ rather than IQ, because these systems will be really good at IQ. They're not, they're a mixed bag on EQ still, so.
I don't know if they can run faculty meetings very well. Maybe.
They might lose their temper. Okay, we had another question I saw.
Okay, thank you guys. Boy, a lot of interesting comments. Thank you very much. I have a question that relates to what the CEO of Intel talked about. It was a different situation. He was coming to an organization that was having a lot of problems internally and in the marketplace. You guys are the head of very successful universities and educational institutions. But he brought out a common challenge of the leader of an organization, and that's to get people to come to him with the problems, with the things that are going poorly. So what have you done to get people to come to you, your reports, with the problems? Is it happening? It rarely does in an organization. If it's not happening, what are you doing to kind of spur that and solve problems?
I think building a really strong senior team is the most important thing you can do. And almost everything that we do in a university, if it happens in academic life, it affects campus life, it affects budget, like everything's interconnected. And so when you have a very team-based approach, nobody can fudge it and say everything's going well because their colleagues know it's not true. And then you have to build an environment of trust where people know that if they raise problems, even problems in their unit, it's not going to come back to bite them. It's going to be rewarded. So I couldn't have agreed more. I loved his comments about leadership in an organization. They do apply to universities.
This is a fundamental leadership question. I appreciate it. I think I was asked a question about leadership I've never been asked before recently. And the question was, what's the hardest leadership lesson to teach? And I take that as related to your question. And my answer was keeping your ego in check.
Yeah, humility.
It's just very easy. And I think when somebody is good at that, people feel a little bit more room to give you the kind of, speaking truth to power kind of feedback. I think those two things are related.
I'd say be humble and find a great provost.
Yeah, exactly.
Please join me in thanking our panelists here.